Hello, friends, and welcome to the 8:30 Live. And now YouTube's just kicked in, right? Yes. Well, hello and welcome to the 8:30 Live. Now, still catching up on all my work that I didn't do on Election Day because I was out in the field doing Election Day work. But, yeah, so I didn't look at the news much today. But there was a piece of news that I checked out. Well, actually, a couple, like three. So we'll cover those. And then, because Dorian's been pestering me for like hardcore, I got a pirated copy of John Bolton's book in the room where it happened, and I'll read a little bit of it, and we'll determine whether or not it's trash. I have heard it is trash, but, whatever. It was a request, and I'm all for honoring requests. And if I say do something, I'm going to do it. Although I guess we never did do the Zoom call now that I think about it, but I did get a monitor, so I guess we'll do a Zoom call now that I have the monitor and can set that up. Anywho, let's get to like three of these headlines, then let's dive into John Bolton's crappy book and all laugh at it and pass judgment on him. Okay, so first, happy news for everybody so far, although it might still be a little early to tell. The Wall Street Journal put an article saying that it doesn't look like the protests have led to any surge in COVID-19 cases where they happened. So New York, really it was about New York. So New York hasn't had any surge in COVID-19 cases due to the protests. Now, there are potentially a lot of reasons for this, one of them being that we have not yet had enough time elapse since the protests to see the full potential impact. But the protests were going on for quite some time. And particularly at the beginning, when it was the most raucous and people were doing the most things at night, and that was when people weren't wearing their masks, we've had a good 2 weeks since then, maybe 2.5 weeks since that, unless time is really compressed and I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm pretty sure it's been about 2 weeks since the biggest protests were happening at night. And so we'll see whether the COVID-19 situation escalates in New York, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it so far. And this could be for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the big protests where people were packed together were during the day, and a lot of folks wore masks. I went to several of those. Everybody was wearing a mask. I also went to nighttime stuff, and still, you'd be surprised, I think, there were still a lot of people wearing masks, although some weren't. The other thing is all the protests were outdoors, which has a significant impact on whether or not the virus actually spreads. And there are a couple of other mitigating factors, such as the fact that I saw a lot of other people trying to keep their distance from folks. It was actually the kettling that the NYPD undertook and the cramming of people down side streets that I saw, which led to the tightest, most dangerous situations in regards to the pandemic. For the most part, protesters weren't interested in just packing in to spaces. And again, they were wearing masks and they were outdoors. So we'll see what happens, but this is a very good sign. And the other possibility, of course, is that New York has done such a good job corralling the virus that the actual prevalence of the virus in the community is low enough that transmission rates just aren't that high. So your likelihood of coming in contact with somebody with the virus is low, and potentially people are doing a good job self-quarantining when they believe that they've come in contact with an infected person and they're in a vulnerable population, or they feel that they're at risk of COVID-19. So that might be a thing. And then the last thing I'll say is certainly that the crowds were definitely on the younger side. So we haven't really expanded testing like crazy. You can still do we've got basically the same testing. We're not testing all the protesters because they're young, and because our number one indicator, I think, of whether people have coronavirus in this country is whether hospital numbers goes up. It could also be that coronavirus has spread pretty decently throughout the protests, but very few people are experiencing any real symptoms, which would then just imply that the protests were bad for the spread of the pandemic, but because nobody's going to the hospital, we're not counting them. So those are several possibilities as to why it doesn't seem that the protests have led to anything substantive by way of COVID-19 case increases, but only time will tell. Let's hope we pull it out, though. I'll tell you what, we're going to do 2 comments. Oh, actually, speaking also of COVID-19, in case folks didn't know, Donald Trump, being the lunatic and asshole that he is coming to New Jersey soon, and he has decided not to obey 2-week quarantine laws. So as I mentioned, I think it was yesterday, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, the tri-state area effectively, have all entered into a pact whereby folks coming or folks who have visited high corona case states have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks upon entering New Jersey, New York, or Connecticut. Donald Trump has been to a high COVID-19 case state recently. He's been to several, in fact, and he'll be visiting New Jersey and not observing the rules. The man is incorrigible. He simply doesn't believe that rules apply to him and is unwilling to do anything that is mildly inconvenient to himself out of respect or courtesy for either other people or entire host states. So personally, I feel that is disqualifying for a candidate for president. We'll see what happens. And then the last thing to mention, then we'll do the comments, and then we'll get to Bolton's thing, is just that the other day, Secretary of the Treasury Steven Mnuchin said that he was denying Congress's request to see to whom the stimulus money, the $500 billion in stimulus money that were allotted to Treasury to hand out, he's denying Congress's request to see to whom Treasury gave that money. The explanation was that they don't want the public to know the compensation that individuals received, whether like they gave money to firms, but some of the firms are so small that it would reveal compensation. They didn't want that to be public, and he said that Congress is within its rights to have oversight of this money, but that he wants them to commit to having it be confidential. That is not really within the Treasury Department's purview to demand. Congress has oversight authority, which Mnuchin agreed to, and it doesn't have to abide by any of Treasury's rules. It simply has the right to know what happens to the taxpayer money. Now, it might be courteous or nice of them to keep that information confidential, but at the same time, they represent voters and taxpayers, and if they feel that it's important to publicize bad spending by the government, then that's on them, and they'll suffer the political ramifications of it. Anyway, we'll take these comments, and then let's start reading. I'm excited because, I don't know, I've been pestered to do this for a while, so I'm glad to be doing it, I guess. I hope Dorian's here. He's been the one demanding it. All right, Michael Kaplan. Charles Booker took a lead in E-Day voting. Oh, Charles Booker, yes. This is the person running against Amy McGrath to challenge Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. Charles Booker took a lead in Election Day voting. Louisville is very dominant in that segment of the primary. Hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots are still to be counted. Apparently, with many rural and suburban counts not counted at all yet. I will make one update as well for here in New York. Carolyn Maloney has pulled ahead with a slightly larger lead against Suraj Patel. It looks like third-party candidate or a third candidate spoiler, Lauren Ashcraft, really siphoned off a bunch of young votes. So one can't definitively say that Maloney's lead is because of Lauren Ashcraft and Pete Harrison as well. Lauren Ashcraft has about 12% of the vote. Pete Harrison has about 5.6% of the vote, something like that. And Suraj now, I believe, is at 48 with Maloney at 38 with Maloney at 40 something. I can't remember. Point is, she's pulled ahead by like 5 or 6 points. We'll see what happens, but still a nail biter. We'll see what happens with the absentee ballots. Simon Sachs. Hi, Ben. Hello, Simon, as ever. Michael Kaplan. Hi, Ben. Hi, Al. 2009 NYD leadership in the house tonight. Is Al here? I didn't know that. Al, say something. Julianne Ballington. But healthy young people still wound up in the hospital. Yes, but not in very large numbers. So if the number of people who are out in the protest, if they're mainly healthy folks and their odds of ending up in the hospital are low and they're not getting sick, then you can still have spreading of the virus without anybody knowing. Deidre's here. If Deidre wants to say something about the school budget, which we spoke about yesterday, but she's posted Chalkbeat article today about the cutting of the school budget, please feel free to weigh in. Otherwise, as soon as I get through these comments, we'll get to the reason. Oh, Al said something. Michael Kaplan, we're fine with Trump not lingering in our state. Who said he's not going to linger? He's going to come, he's going to breathe on everybody, and he'll stay for as long as he wants. Simon Sachs, Governor Murphy called Trump an essential worker, so he doesn't have to he's an essential worker, but his workplace is in Washington, D.C. Why is he even going to New Jersey? Critiquing all of the candidates that ran. I will say that I wrote an endorsement piece, which is on my Facebook and on my Twitter and on Medium, and the endorsement piece is not one about good and bad. It simply talks about the rationale that I had for supporting one candidate over another. And I think importantly, the endorsements, because they're based on rationale, don't just write people off. They don't cancel anybody. They prescribe what candidates can do to, I think, better represent their districts and certainly earn my support in the future. So, the endorsements that I put out aren't just about, oh, vote for this person. It's also, here's the rationale. And if the incumbent or other candidates want to earn my support and the support of folks who think like me or agree with my rationale, then they should do X, Y, Z. Maybe I should spell that out in particular, because I think that's actually a valuable thing for candidates to have. Al says something as was requested. Julianne says he has the best words, and I agree. Will said he wanted to watch Mr. Ben's show. Is Will watching? Will is Al's son, and he's great. He's a lot of fun, and I hope he's enjoying the program. We're going to do a little light reading in a second, so hopefully John Bolton doesn't have too much cursing in his book. Julian Ballington, I think all the internet knows how I feel about Suraj Patel and his misogyny and sexism. Well, if you say so. Wait, you think there is nuance with Suraj? I think there's nuance with everything, Julianne. Or at the very least, I'm not going to make a blanket statement tonight when I can't explain the nuance of anything. So, with that, we have come to the final comment. And now, let's start reading Michael Bolton's book. We're going to do a little bit of this, see how it goes. The Room Where It Happened. Not Michael Bolton, John Bolton. Michael Bolton plays this clarinet or something, right? Silly. World's a funny place. All right, sorry. The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir, John Bolton, former National Security Advisor of the United States. Simon & Schuster is thanking me for downloading this ebook. I'm not going to sign up to register it, though, because it's pirated. My mom would be so mad. She's an intellectual property attorney, and this sort of stuff really, we had such arguments over Napster. Do people know what Napster is? Oh, I'm just scrolling through all of these blank pages. There's a lot of blank pages in this. Sing it, make up a song. That's what my dad used to do that when he would read me stories. Apparently, I would ask him when I was like 4, I asked him to read the same book every night, and he got so bored reading it, he started singing it. He's a terrible singer, but I still asked him to do it. Anyway, this book is for Gretchen and Jennifer Sarah. 2 first names, huh? Hard pounding, this, gentlemen. Let's see who will pound the longest. The Duke of Wellington, rallying his troops at Waterloo, 1815. That's the quote that John Bolton started to start his book. That's the quote that John Bolton decided to start his book with. Al Benninghoff, unpopular conspiracy theory. If you watch all of Ben's videos in order, his hair gets longer every time. Yay for pirating this book. John Bolton should get no money for abusing to divulge this in the impeachment hearing. Agreed. Chapter 1. The Long March to a West Wing corner office. Blatantly ripping off the Chinese Communist Party's Long March, but I'll forgive it. Okay. One attraction of being National Security Advisor is the sheer multiplicity and volume of challenges that confront you. If you don't like turmoil, uncertainty, and risk, while being constantly overwhelmed with information, decisions to be made, and the sheer amount of work, and enlivened by international and domestic personality and ego conflicts beyond description, try something else. It is exhilarating, but it is nearly impossible to explain to outsiders how the pieces fit together, which they often don't in any coherent way. So basically, if you're not a stud like me, John Bolton, you can't be National Security Advisor. I'm the man. This guy is. This is some self-aggrandizing shit already. I'm almost impressed. I didn't think the first paragraph would cram that much into it. Okay, paragraph 2. I cannot offer a comprehensive theory of the Trump administration's transformation because none is possible. Washington's conventional wisdom on Trump's trajectory, however, is wrong. This received truth, attractive to the intellectually lazy, is that Trump was always bizarre, but in his first 15 months, uncertain in his new place and held in check by an axis of adults, end quote, he hesitated to act. As time passed, however, Trump became more certain of himself. The axis of adults departed, things fell apart, and Trump was surrounded only by yes men. So John Bolton firmly believes that Donald Trump is fine, and that his administration for over a year was fine. Totally in line with the interests and traditions of the United States. He goes on for like hundreds of pages, but for the moment, pieces of this hypothesis are true, but the overall picture is simplistic. The axis of adults, in many respects, caused enduring problems not because they successfully managed Trump, as the high-minded, an apt description I picked up from the French for those who see themselves as our moral betters, have it, but because they did precisely the opposite. They didn't do nearly enough to establish order. And what they did do was so transparently self-serving and so publicly dismissive of many of Trump's clear goals, whether worthy or unworthy, that they fed Trump's already suspicious mindset, making it harder for those who came later to have legitimate policy exchanges with the president. I had long felt that the role of the National Security Advisor was to ensure that a president understood what options were open to him for any given decision he needed to make, and then to ensure that this decision was carried out by the pertinent bureaucracies. The National Security Council process was certain to be different for different presidents, but these were the critical objectives the process should achieve. John Bolton, hero of process, the number one man who says we have to take the right steps to bomb every country on earth. Oh, there's comments here? What are they about? Hair looks better longer. It evens out his face. Thanks. His face is very long. His long hair is poofy. Makes his face wider. Okay, cool. So now the show is just about the fans talking about my physical appearance. Well, I work out too, so yeah. It also allows for hair flips. The hair flips are very share. Lol. The hair is just in my eyes, people. Going on. Because, however, the axis of adults had served Trump so poorly, he second-guessed people's motives, saw conspiracies behind rocks, and remained stunningly uninformed on how to run the White House, let alone the huge federal government. The axis of adults is not entirely responsible for this mindset. Trump is Trump. I came to understand that he believed he could run the executive branch and establish national security policies on instinct, relying on personal relationships with foreign leaders, and with made-for-television showmanship always top of mind. Now, instinct, personal relations, and showmanship are elements of any president's repertoire, but they are not all of it by a long stretch. Analysis, planning, intellectual discipline and rigor, evaluation of results, course corrections, and the like are the blocking and tackling of presidential decision-making, the unglamorous side of the job. Appearances takes you only so far. In institutional terms, therefore, it is undeniable that Trump's transition and opening year plus were botched irretrievably. Processes that should have immediately become second nature, especially for the many Trump advisors with no prior service, even in junior executive branch positions, never happened. Trump and most of his team never read the government's, quote, operator's manual, end quote. Perhaps not realizing doing so wouldn't automatically make them members of the, quote, deep state, end quote. I entered the existing chaos seeing problems that could have been resolved in the administration's first 100 days, if not before. Constant personnel turnover obviously didn't help, nor did the White House's Hobbesian bellum omnium contra omnes, war of all against all. It may be a bit much to say that Hobbes' description of human existence is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, accurately described life in the White House. But by the end of their tenures, many key advisors would have leaned toward it. As I explained in my book, Surrender is Not an Option, my approach to accomplishing things in government has always been to absorb as much as possible about the bureaucracies where I served, state, justice, the United States Agency for International Development, so I could more readily accomplish my objectives. My goal was not to get a membership card, but to get a driver's license. That thinking was not common in the Trump White House. In early visits to the West Wing, the differences between this presidency and previous ones I had served in were stunning. What happened on one day on a particular issue often had little resemblance to what happened the next day or the day after. Few seemed to realize it, care about it, or have any interest in fixing it. And it wasn't going to get much better, which depressing but inescapable conclusion I reached only after I had joined the administration. End section 1. Not chapter 1, just there's a line here. So, folks' thoughts. Good, bad, stupid so far? Julian Ballantine says, holy shit, your reading is really good. Great use of inflection and emotion. If you take time to read over next time, you will have a chance to develop even more mention. I don't know what mention is, but thanks. I'm often told I have the voice for radio. I was phone banking the other day and somebody was like, I thought you were a robot. And I was like, because I have such an official voice. And she was like, yeah. I was like, oh, ha, 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 ha. Anyway, Bolton goes on for like 570 pages. We're on 8. Let's read at least to page 10. Get a good cross section of this thing. I mean, that's like X%. I don't know, whatever. Former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt, a mentor of mine, liked to say, in politics, there are no immaculate conceptions. This insight powerfully explains appointments to very senior executive branch positions. Despite the frequency of press lines like, quote, I was very surprised when President Smith called me, end quote, such expressions of innocence are invariably only casually related to the truth. At no point is the competition for high-level jobs more intense than during the, quote, presidential transition, end quote, a U.S. invention that has become increasingly elaborate in recent decades. Transition teams provide good case for graduate bills on not to do business. They exist for a fixed, fleeting period from the election to the inauguration and then disappear forever. They are overwhelmed by hurricanes of incoming information and disinformation, complex, often competing strategy and policy analyses, many consequential personnel decisions for the real government and media and interest group scrutiny and pressure. Michael Kaplan, not really new information. It was reported that Trump told Obama in their first election meeting that he thought many Obama people were staying on. Well, he could have rehired them. Dude, how much better would that have been? How much better would that have been? Undeniably, some transitions are better than others. How they unfold reveals much about the administration to come. Richard Nixon's 1968 to 69 transition was the first example of contemporary transitions. With careful analysis of each major executive branch agency, Ronald Reagan's in 1980 to 81 was a landmark in hewing to the maxim, quote, personnel is policy, end quote, intently focused on picking people who adhere to Reagan's platform. And Donald Trump's 2016 to 2017 transition was Donald Trump's. I spent election night, November 8th through 9th, in Fox News' Manhattan studios, waiting for comment on air about the next president's foreign policy priorities, which everyone expected would occur in the 10 p.m. hour, just after Hillary Clinton was declared the winner. I finally went on the air around 3 o'clock the next morning. So much for advanced planning, not only at Fox, but also in the camp of the president-elect. Few observers believed Trump would win, and, as with Robert Dole's failed 1996 campaign against Bill Clinton, Trump's pre-election preparations were modest, reflecting the impending doom. In comparison with Hillary's operation, which resembled a large army on a certain march toward power, in comparison with Hillary's operation, which resembled a large army on a certain march toward power, Trump seemed staffed by a few hardy souls with time on their hands. His unexpected victory, therefore, caught his campaign unready, resulting in immediate turf fights with the transition volunteers and the scrapping of almost all its pre-election product. Starting on November 9th was hardly auspicious. Starting over on November 9th was hardly auspicious, especially with the bulk of the transition staff in Washington and Trump and his closest aides at Trump Tower in Manhattan. Trump didn't understand much of what the huge federal behemoth did before he won, and he didn't acquire much, if any, greater awareness during transition, which did not bode well for his performance in office. That's crazy. That's crazy. So presidents don't take office until the end of January, right, of the next year. This election was in early November. So, he gets like 3 months to work through, all right, what's the federal government do, blah, 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 put together an idea of how he's going to run things. Didn't do it. I mean, none of us are surprised here, obviously, but Jesus. I played an insignificant part in Trump's campaign, except for one meeting with the candidate on Friday morning, September 23rd at Trump Tower, 3 days before his first debate with Hillary. 3 days before his first debate with Clinton. Hillary and Bill were a year ahead of me at law school. So in addition to discussing national security, I offered Trump my thoughts on how Hillary would perform. Well prepared and scripted, following her game plan no matter what. She hadn't changed in over 40 years. Trump did most of the talking, as in our first meeting in 2014, before his candidacy. As we concluded, he said, quote, your views and mine are actually very close. Very close, end quote. At that point, I was widely engaged. Senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Fox News contributor, a regular on the speaking circuit, of counsel at a major law firm, member of corporate boards, senior advisor to a global private equity firm, and author of opinion articles at the rate of about one a week. In late 2013, I formed a PAC and a super PAC to aid House and Senate candidates who believed in a strong U.S. national security policy, i.e., my own commentary, but i.e. bombing everybody in sight. Back to Bolton. Distributing hundreds of thousands of dollars directly to candidates and spending millions in independent expenditures in the 2014 and 2016 campaigns, and preparing to do so again in 2018. I had plenty to do, but I had also served in the last 3 Republican administrations, and international relations has fascinated me since my days at Yale College. I was ready to go in again. Where's the next section on this thing? Okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read to the end of this page. We are currently on page, if you want to read at home or follow along at home, we are currently on page 10. So we're going to read to the end of page 10, and then we'll do the last paragraph if it spills over into page 11. Then we'll call it an evening. New threats and opportunities were coming at us rapidly, and 8 years of Barack Obama meant there was much to repair. I had thought long and hard about America's national security in a tempestuous world, Russia and China at the strategic level, Iran, North Korea, and other rogue nuclear weapons aspirants, the swirling threats of radical Islamist terrorism in the tumultuous Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, Afghanistan and beyond, and the threats in our own hemisphere, like Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. I'm sorry, the man considers Cuba a threat to the United States. I don't even know where to go with that. Anyway, I read on with a straight face. While foreign policy label couldn't do it. Sorry. I read on with a straight. This guy thinks that Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are threats to the United States. Okay. Obviously, we should just bomb them all into non-existence. Okay. I read on with a straight face. While foreign policy labels are unhelpful. Sorry. This guy's a lunatic. While foreign policy labels are unhelpful, except to the intellectually lazy, if pressed, I like to say my policy was, quote, pro-American, end quote. I followed Adam Smith on economics, Edmund Burke on society, the Federalist Papers on government, and a merger of Dean Acheson and Foster Dulles on national security. My first political campaigning was in 1964 on behalf of Barry Goldwater. Let me just say the following things. The economics of Adam Smith are anti-war because they're pro-trade. The Federalist Papers are anti-involving ourselves in a bunch of wars. I mean, Jesus Christ, dude. Anyway, John Bolton goes on. I knew senior Trump campaign officials like Steve Bannon, Dave Bossie, and Kellyanne Conway from prior associations and had spoken to them about joining the Trump administration should one happen. Once the transition began, I thought it was reasonable to offer my services as Secretary of State, as did others. When Chris Wallace came off the Fox set early on November 9th, after the race was called, he shook my hand and said, smiling broadly, "Congratulations, Mr. Secretary." Of course, there was no dearth of contenders to lead the State Department, which generated endless media speculation about who the, quote, frontrunner was, starting with Newt Gingrich, proceeding to Rudy Giuliani, then Mitt Romney, and then back to Rudy. I had worked with and respected each of them, and each was credible in his own way. I paid special attention because there was constant chatter, not to mention pressure, that I should settle for being deputy secretary. Obviously not my preference. What came next demonstrated Trumpian decision-making and provided, or should have, a cautionary tale. Ooh, foreshadowing. While all the early, quote, leading contenders were broadly conservative, philosophically, they brought different backgrounds, different perspectives, different styles, different pluses and minuses to the table. Among these possibilities, and others like Tennessee Senator Bob Corker and former Utah Governor John Huntsman, were there common, consistent attributes and accomplishments Trump sought? Obviously not. And observers should have asked, what is the real principle governing Trump's personnel selection process? Why not have Giuliani as Attorney General, a job he was made for? Why not have Giuliani as Attorney General, a job he was made for? Romney as White House Chief of Staff, bringing his undeniable strategic planning and management skills, and Gingrich, with decades of creative theorizing, as White House domestic policy czar. Okay, I'm going to read on. Now I'm enthralled. I want to hear Bolton's conclusion on Trump's personnel decision-making process. Was Trump looking only for people from, quote, central casting, end quote? Much was made of his purported dislike of my mustache. For what it's worth, he told me it was never a factor, noting that his father also had one. Other than shrinks and those deeply interested in Sigmund Freud, which I assuredly am not, I don't believe my looks played a role in Trump's thinking. And if they did, God help the country. Attractive women, however, fall into a different category when it comes to Trump. Loyalty was the key factor, which Giuliani had proved beyond peradventure in the days after the Access Hollywood tape became public in early October. Lyndon Johnson once reportedly said of an aide, quote, "I want real loyalty. I want him to kiss my ass in Macy's window at high noon and tell me it smells like roses," end quote. Who knew Trump read so much history? Giuliani was later extremely gracious to me, saying after he withdrew from the Secretary of State melee, quote, "John would probably be my choice. I think John is terrific," end quote. The president-elect called me on November 17th, and I congratulated him on his victory. He recounted his recent calls with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and looked ahead to meeting that afternoon with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Quote, "We'll have you up here in a couple of days," end quote, Trump promised, and, quote, "and we are looking at you for a number of situations," end quote. Situations, that's not what jobs are. They're not situations. Anyway, I digress. Some of the new president's first personnel announcements came the next day, with Jeff Sessions picked as Attorney General, eliminating that option for Giuliani. Mike Flynn as National Security Advisor, appropriately rewarding Flynn's relentless campaign service. And Mike Pompeo as CIA Director. A few weeks after Flynn's announcement, Henry Kissinger told me, quote, "He'll be gone within a year," end quote. Although he couldn't have known what was about to happen, Kissinger knew Flynn was in the wrong job. As the days passed, more cabinet and senior White House positions emerged publicly, including, on November 23rd, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley as ambassador to the United Nations. With cabinet rank, a bizarre step to take with the Secretary of State still unchosen. Haley had no qualifications for the job, but it was ideal for someone with presidential ambitions to check the, quote, foreign policy box on her campaign resume. Cabinet rank or no, the UN ambassador was part of state, and coherent U.S. foreign policy can have only one Secretary of State. Yet here was Trump picking subordinate positions in state's universe with no secretary in sight. By definition, there was trouble ahead, especially when I heard from a Haley staff person that Trump had considered her to be secretary. Haley, her staffer said, declined the offer because of lack of experience, which she obviously hoped to acquire as UN ambassador. Wow, nutso, huh? Somebody who could have been Secretary of State turned it down because she felt she wasn't qualified. Oh, Donald Trump, where will it end? 2020, that's where. But still, Cuba is a threat with their cigars because of cancer, lol. Cuba apparently has a vaccine that prevents lung cancer, so maybe not. I mean, if we opened up trade with them for real. Should we go on? Okay, we'll read the rest of this page. There's not a good break here anytime soon. I am curious where this is going, though. So I'm going to read the rest of this page. Then I really am going to break. And I think I might have to read some of this tomorrow. It's a little less dry than the Magna Carta, which I do enjoy talking about. The title of the book should have been called The Anatomy of a Train Wreck. Thank you, Simon. Maybe you should submit that to Simon & Schuster as a forward. Jared Kushner, whom Paul Manafort had introduced me to during the campaign, called me over Thanksgiving. He assured me it was, quote, still very much in the mix, end quote, for Secretary of State. Sorry, let me do that in my Jared Kushner voice. He assured me that I was still, quote, still very much in the mix, end quote, for Secretary of State, and, quote, in a whole bunch of different contexts, Donald is a big fan of yours, as well, we all are, end quote. Meanwhile, the New York Post reported on decision-making at Mar-a-Lago at Thanksgiving, quoting one source, quote, Donald was walking around asking everybody he could about who should be his Secretary of State. There was a lot of criticism of Romney and a lot of people like Rudy. There are also many people advocating for John Bolton, end quote. I knew I should have worked the Mar-a-Lago primary harder. Certainly, I was grateful for the considerable support I had among pro-Israel Americans. Jews and evangelicals alike. Second Amendment supporters, Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, Taiwanese Americans, and conservatives generally. Many people called Trump and his advisors on my behalf, part of the venerable transitional lobbying process. The transition's spreading disorder increasingly reflected not just organizational failures, but Trump's essential decision-making style. Charles Krauthammer, a sharp critic of his, told me he had been wrong earlier to characterize Trump's behavior as that of an 11-year-old boy. Quote, "I was off by 10 years," end quote, Krauthammer remarked. Quote, "He's like a 1-year-old. Everything is seen through the prism of whether it benefits Donald Trump," end quote. That was certainly the way the personnel selection process appeared from the outside. As one Republican strategist told me, the best way to become Secretary of State was to, quote, "try to be the last man standing," end quote. Vice President-elect Pence called on November 29th to ask me in Washington the next day. To ask me to meet in Washington the next day. I knew Pence from his service on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was a solid supporter of a strong national security policy. We conversed easily about a range of foreign and defense policy issues, but I was struck when he said about state, quote, "I would not characterize this decision as imminent," end quote. Given subsequent press reports that Giuliani withdrew his candidacy for secretary at about that time, it could be the entire selection process for state was starting all over again, an almost certainly unprecedented development that far into the transition. And that, my friends, is where we'll call it. Page 13, sentence 1. End of paragraph. Let's see what the comments are, and then I'm going to go have dinner. Simon Sachs, or another title could be Witness to the Origins of Shin Godzilla. Thank you, Simon. I do love that you're always in attendance for the lives and always ready to make those inside jokes. Ooh, fireworks. Okay. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow at 8:30.